now entering the truth zone, deep into the vortex of the information revolution with your host, Michael B.
My name is Michael B, and this is The Truth Zone, coming to you live from North Dallas, Texas, here on this gorgeous, gorgeous day, 7/11, folks, July 11th, 2017. And today's topic is going to be America's shadow government. Now, I was going to run a long clip, but it was too movie-like, talking about Agenda 2030. If you don't know what Agenda 2030 is, it's really an addendum to Agenda 21, which has been called Sustainable Development. Others would view it as a soft-kill depopulation process where you will have a very small elite owning the best of the best, and the rest of us who's ever left over gets to be a slave class of sorts, gets to have a universal wage, where no matter what our talents are, no matter what our drive is to succeed, we don't get to. And that is on the table in the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen. You can look that up. You can look up everything that I have to say on this show. All right? Nothing that I've said hasn't been verified first, just so you're aware. And 2030 morphs Agenda 21 into our present age of technology, and it's basically a formation of a one-world government, a global technocracy. And this is where, I've talked about, there's nothing new about this new world order. Nothing. It's really a one world order. The only thing new is that now they have the technology to do this very simply. They don't have to, in truth, they don't have to blow us up. They don't have to shoot us or stab us. They can just delete us. Now, they can delete us in many ways. They can delete us in the physical, and they can delete us on paper or through the electronics, if you will. They manipulate our food, they manipulate our water, and through the media and the internet, which plays a massive role in Agenda 2030. They can socially engineer us to become adaptable to their plan. So they don't have to run roughshod over us with blood and guts. Certainly, that may come later, and I think it'll be with the people that are going to start that, because unfortunately, as you can see, we're being pushed and we're being programmed to accept that the only thing we can do now is load up with guns and load up with survival food and be ready for the great civil war. That's what's being pushed by the media, mainstream and independent. You look at our various TV shows, and movies, attacks against the White House, attacks against the government, attacks against the people. We see this zombie fascination where, the government put out a virus and we became people-eating zombies in this global apocalypse. And the only ones that survive are the rough and tough survivalists that prepared for all of this. When in reality, this really doesn't have to happen. It's just that we've accepted it. And we are accomplices to it because do we not ourselves as adults get hooked on the internet? Are we constantly looking at our phones? Do we not go to restaurants with our family, and if there's a waiting list, we have to sit on those benches or whatever? And how many people do you see with their faces in their phone? How about our children? We allow our children to sit on the internet 6, 7, 10, 12 hours a day, when every medical study that I have ever seen says no more than 2 hours a day. When it goes longer, it starts to warp the developing brain. Now, people will tell you otherwise. Oh, those things aren't true, and they're getting into virtual reality, and it's teaching them to think and explore different possibilities. Not after the 2-hour mark. I mean, personally, I'd rather listen to qualified professionals that don't have really any skin in the game, but to provide knowledge. And they say, yeah, the computer is great for problem solving and developing within the 2-hour daily mark. But like anything else, overindulgence has its consequences, and you become reliant, and I've seen it with my own eyes. You become socially inept. You develop social. I don't want to use the word social. You're harmed socially by the overactive use of the internet. Look what happens to couples. They've got their faces in their phone. Do they really talk much anymore? Do they really engage? No, they get to escape. And it's both sides of the coin. Milo, and it's hard to pronounce his last name, Yiannopoulos or something like that. You people know who he is. Wrote a brilliant article how men are leaving the traditional woman relationship and are embedded in pornography and video games. Video games, whether off of the internet or off of the PlayStation and Xbox, it's the same thing. It doesn't matter. But it's the same story. Instead of engaging like normal human beings, people are vegetating, and I'm guilty of it. Stuff that's going on in my life, I'm doing this, and I laughed. I laughed when I read that article. Matter of fact, he was on the Alex Jones show months ago talking about this, and in that article he left out, we're also working out more. And I said to myself, wow, that's me. That's me. That's exactly what's going on, because the mind warping of these agendas is depopulation. And in my opinion, the first stage of that was the gender war created in America, especially in the 1920s, with women's suffrage, and it morphed into women wanting to become more like men. And congratulations, by the way. Women are more depressed. they're more suicidal. The American family unit, and I'm keying in on that, has been obliterated. With the liquidation of faith, with all of these Eastern philosophies coming in, which really the head of all of that really is Satanism, in my opinion, and I think the evidence is overwhelming. You just look outside, folks, in society. There's an article that I was reading this morning, talks about people are getting exorcisms more and more to treat what are really emotional and psychological disorders, schizophrenia, epilepsy, right? We get warnings on PlayStations and Xboxes about you could, you could develop seizures and epilepsy because the synapses are firing all wrong. And if you think that being embedded in all of these electronics are not skewing your brain and skewing society, you're wrong. And with these exorcisms, the gist of the article is, and it makes a good point, you know, there are many different mini sects, S-E-C-T-S, in Christianity that's become so fractured. And then, like I said, with the bringing in of the hocus pocus Eastern stuff, which, quite frankly, they're all pre-Christian Babylonian arts that just spread throughout the East in the Bible times of Moses, spread to southeastern Asia, and then into the Middle East. That's really what it is. And it was no coincidence that Moses wrote about Abraham being called from, at the time, God's name was El Shaddai, meaning Almighty God, pulled Abram, who became Abraham, out of the East, out of the Orient, which at the time was Babylon and Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq and Iran, which was Persia. Pulled him out of there and brought him more west into the land of Canaan, as we know is the beginning of the Nile Delta, then reaching into Europe. And the Hebrews, if they weren't the first monotheistic religion of the day, they certainly became the most significant, getting us out of this pre-Christian voodoo. And now exorcisms are on the rise. And a very interesting piece in that article talks about the fact, the attraction to this is based on the first attraction to all of these magical arts. And I talked about last week Aleister Crowley, Albert Pike, Manly P. Hall. Those people set the groundwork for these things to come into the United States of America, and it's just a path of corruption. It's an absolute path of corruption. And I just want to pan down to this article real quick. So, popular culture has brought exorcisms back into people's consciousness. And I think because of that, there has been an increase in exorcisms Adam Pasame, a professor of sociology and popular religion at Western Sydney University, who is collecting data about the current rise of exorcisms around the globe. Today, people are more interested in the emotional, enchanted side of life than the rational one, which has led to a rebirth. You see, a rebirth, not a new age, folks. It's the old age being resurrected, which leads to a rebirth of magical thinking. When asked about the increased demand for exorcisms, the Vatican released a statement blaming the rise in black magic, paganism, satanic rites, and Ouija boards. And I'm going to tell you something right now. Those Ouija boards are they're not fake, folks. There have been many, many stories, and I've heard them personally, where they open up gateways to the spiritual realm that you don't want to be part of. And I've talked about that. There are many realms in the heavens. The Bible talks about that. It's not just heaven. Where you want to be is at the highest realm. You don't want to be at the lowest realm, right above the earth where Satan sits. That's his place. That's why he has his fingers on all the world governments. And it's not an accident that as more satanic rituals get revealed by these leaders, the more pushback we the people are doing. Because we inherently know that this stuff is no good. Now, this article kind of sideways slaps Christianity in the face. And because the article first started out with, there were exorcisms that led in death, and they were really mental disorders. And like I said, there are renegade factions everywhere you go. But then the article does point out that, when you have these little pockets that aren't sanctioned and aren't under the approval of the authorities, then yes, you get corruption like that. And the article also talks about that exorcisms, and I had this conversation with someone in my church. Exorcisms are not what the movies have led you to believe. Okay, people are not writhing around, spitting out pea soup and all that other garbage. It doesn't work that way. It's way more somber than that. Now, Father Gabriel Amorth, perhaps the most famous exorcist in modern history, told the Telegraph that the rise in exorcisms is connected to the proliferation of Eastern faiths, such as yoga, which, I guess there's spirituality in it. To me, it depends how you use it. I think it's a great stretching exercise. I don't do it, but there are people that do, and I wouldn't put much in like spiritualness in it. Now the Hindus and the Buddhists, they believe some fat guy that stared at a flower. Well, he's their main dude, and the Hindus believe in pink elephants. Well, whatever, But and the popularity of Harry Potter books. Well, again, that magical conjuring stuff, which, quite frankly, has just proven to be empty. See, as we stray from the truth, the more lies that get produced. And look at the results. You see, you don't have to believe me. You don't have to believe me. You can just look at the results yourself. And the deeper it seems the more deeply entrenched people are into all of this that's being discussed here, the more troubling their lives are. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can observe it for yourself. According to him, engaging in either one of these things is like an open invitation for Satan to inhabit your soul. Now, again, it ends with these warnings are familiar to Maria McClellan, whose possession was said to have been caused by a Ouija board. Well, look, again, you're going to have snake oil salesmen and everything. But one cannot deny that our society is devolving before our eyes. It is not evolving, it is devolving. And this leads me to the shadow government and the first of these clips, because as I've stated last week and in the past, a depressed, divided, and also poverty-stricken society is an easier manipulative and controlled society. So we're going to go into the first clip. The path to total dictatorship. America's shadow government and its silent coup. Now, we've heard it on the news, the deep state, continuity of government. It's all connected. This spider web is huge. The mother spider, call it the deep state, the shadow government. This spider is massive. And all 8 legs are very, very powerful. So, when we divide a people with a flood of failed ideologies, of myths, it's easier to control that society, because that society is dependent on a master. Which is why Christianity, Catholicism means universal. And why a united people under one truth, under one set of integrity, of morals and ethics, is a strong and less, I'm not going to say incorruptible because that's impossible, a less corruptible society. So here's the path to total dictatorship. This is clip 1.
Unaffected by elections, unaltered by populist movements, beyond the reach of law, say hello to America's shadow government. A corporatized, militarized, entrenched bureaucracy that is fully operational and staffed by unelected officials who are, in essence, running the country. This shadow government represents the hidden face of a government that has no respect for the freedom of American citizens. No matter who sits in the White House or who allegedly represents us in Congress, this shadow government is here to stay. Indeed, as leaked documents by the FBI reveal, this shadow government, also referred to as the Seventh Floor Group, essentially runs our government out of Washington, D.C. And as the WikiLeaks data concerning the CIA's tapping into all of our electronic devices reveals, everything we're doing is being watched by government eyes. To be precise, however, there are 2 shadow governments that call the shots behind the scenes. The first shadow government, referred to as COG, or continuity of government, is made up of unelected individuals who have been appointed to run the government in the event of a catastrophe. COG is a phantom menace waiting for the right circumstances, a terrorist attack, a natural disaster, an economic meltdown, to bring it out of the shadows where it hides and operates. When and if COG takes over, the police state will transition to martial law. Yet it's the second shadow government, also referred to as the deep state, that poses the greater threat to freedom at this time. Comprised of unelected government bureaucrats, spies, corporations, contractors, paper pushers, and button pushers who are actually calling the shots behind the scenes. This government within a government is the real reason we, the people, have no real control over our so-called government. The deep state, which operates according to its own secret agenda regardless of who is formally in power, makes a mockery of elections and the entire concept of a representative government. So who or what is the deep state? It's the militarized police, which have joined forces with state and federal law enforcement agencies in order to establish themselves as a standing army. It's the fusion centers and spy agencies that have created a total surveillance state and turned us all into suspects. It's the courthouses and prisons that have allowed corporate profits to take precedence over due process and justice. It's the military empire with its private contractors and defense industry that is bankrupting this country. It's the private sector with its 854,000 contract personnel with top secret clearances, incredibly a number greater than that of top secret cleared civilian employees of the government. It's what former congressional staffer Mike Lofgren refers to as, and I'm quoting here, a hybrid of national security and law enforcement agencies. This is comprised of the Department of Defense, the State Department, Homeland Security, the CIA, the Justice Department, the Treasury, the Executive Office of the President by way of the National Security Council, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, a handful of vital federal trial courts, and members of the Defense and Intelligence Committees. It's every facet of a government that is no longer friendly to freedom, and it's working overtime to trample the Constitution underfoot and render the citizenry powerless in the face of the government's power grabs, corruption, and abusive tactics. These are the key players that drive the shadow government. This is the hidden face of the American police state. Just consider some of the key programs and policies advanced by the shadow government that pulls the strings to the puppet show we call the government. Domestic surveillance. The National Security Agency, or NSA, the CIA, FBI, and so on, with their multi-billion-dollar black op budgets, conduct surveillance on every person in the United States who uses a computer or phone. Thus, on any given day, whether you're walking through a store, driving your car, checking your email, or talking to friends and family on the phone, you can be sure that some government agency is listening in and tracking your behavior. Local police have been outfitted with a litany of surveillance gear, from license plate readers and cell phone tracking devices to biometric data recorders. Technology now makes it possible for the police to scan passers-by in order to detect the contents of their pockets, purses, briefcases, and so on. Full-body scanners which perform virtual strip searches of Americans traveling by plane have gone mobile, with roving police vans that peer into vehicles and buildings alike, including homes. Coupled with the nation's growing network of real-time surveillance cameras and facial recognition software, soon there will really be nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. In fact, that day may have already arrived. Global spying. The NSA's massive surveillance network, what the Washington Post refers to as a $500 billion espionage empire, spans the globe and targets every single person on the planet who uses a phone or computer. The NSA's Echelon program intercepts and analyzes virtually every phone call, fax, and email message sent anywhere in the world. In addition to carrying out domestic surveillance, on peaceful political groups such as Amnesty International, Greenpeace, and several religious groups, Echelon has also been a vital component in the government's attempts at political and corporate espionage. Roving TSA searches. The American taxpayer routinely gets ripped off by government agencies in the dubious name of national security. One of the greatest culprits when it comes to swindling taxpayers has been the Transportation Security Agency, or the TSA, with its questionable deployment of and complete mismanagement of millions of dollars worth of airport full-body X-ray scanners, punitive pat-downs by TSA agents, and the theft of travelers' valuables. Then there's the U.S. Patriot Act and the NDAA. America's so-called war on terror, which the government has relentlessly pursued since 9/11, continues to chip away at our freedoms, unravel our Constitution, and transform our nation into a battlefield, thanks in large part to such subversive legislation as the U.S. Patriot Act and the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA. The NDAA actually empowers the president to label someone an extremist and have them taken away to a detention camp where they will not have access to an attorney or be able to see their family. These laws completely circumvent the rule of law and the rights of American citizens. In so doing, they reorient our legal landscape in such a way as to ensure that martial law, rather than the U.S. Constitution, is the roadmap by which we navigate life in the United States. The militarized police state. Thanks to federal grant programs allowing the Pentagon to transfer surplus military supplies and weapons to local law enforcement agencies without charge, police forces have been transformed from peace officers into heavily armed extensions of the military, complete with jackboots, helmets, shields, batons, pepper spray, stun guns, assault rifles, body armor, miniature tanks, and weaponized drones. As such, the police have been given the green light to probe, poke, pinch, taser, search, seize, strip, and generally manhandle anyone they see fit in almost any circumstance, all with the general blessing of the courts. SWAT team raids. More than 80,000 SWAT team raids are carried out every year on unsuspecting Americans by local police for relatively routine police matters. Federal agencies, such as the Department of Education and the Smithsonian, are also equipped with their own militarized police squads. In the process, the incidence of botched raids and related casualties continue to rise. Nationwide, SWAT teams continue to be employed to address an astonishingly trivial array of criminal activity or mere community nuisances, including angry dogs, domestic disputes, improper paperwork filed by an orchid farmer, good example, misdemeanor marijuana possession, and overdue educational loans. As a result, innocent American citizens, including children, are being injured and even killed. Domestic drones. The domestic use of drones continues unabated. As mandated by Congress, soon there will be 30,000 drones crisscrossing the skies of America, all part of an industry that could be worth as much as $30 billion per year. These machines, which will be equipped with weapons, will be able to record all activities using video feeds, heat sensors, and radar. An Inspector General report reveals that the Department of Justice has already spent nearly $4 million on drones domestically, largely for use by the FBI, with grants for another $1.3 million so that police departments and other government agencies can acquire their own drones. The school-to-prison pipeline. A compliant citizenry is now an important element of the deep state controllers. Unfortunately, abject compliance to the state is taught by example in the schools, through school lockdowns where police and drug-sniffing dogs enter the classroom, and zero-tolerance policies that punish all offenses equally and result in young people being expelled for childish behavior. School districts now team up with local law enforcement to create what's called a schoolhouse to jail.
Do you notice how we sometimes get reports that, a couple of kids get into a squabble in school and the police have to be called? And children are questioned without the parents being there, and children are expelled, and they're traumatized. This never happened. I'm 52 years old. This never happened. And I didn't exactly grow up in the greatest of neighborhoods, and rarely were cops called. And when I was in grade school at the time, never were police called on a couple of third graders having a fight or wising off to the teacher or what have you. And we're seeing this more and more today, this police action and this growing and fermenting of fear. And, when you're afraid, you get angry. And when you get angry, you don't make the best of decisions, do you? And it just adds further the need for our own good, the government to protect us, as we're hearing in this clip about the TSA, and then you got the Patriot Act and the NDAA and the 24-hour drone strikes. Due process being eliminated, which is why 9/11 had to happen. It wasn't predicted in white papers, it was set up. They were setting this up. We needed a new Pearl Harbor to get us all excited for war and then to become compliant. Oh yeah, the Patriot Act. That sounds good. It has Patriot in it. But who of the citizenry took the time to read it? I'll be honest, I didn't read it. And then after it's passed and you hear about the ramifications of people directly affected by it, then we're upset. But we comply. And halfway through 2017, we're still complying, aren't we? Let's be honest. We're still funding all of this mayhem. And we're encouraging our children to join the military-industrial complex. Certainly, we are fueling the flames for our own demise. We continue.
House track by imposing a double dose of punishment, suspension or expulsion from school, accompanied by an arrest by the police and a trip to juvenile court and or prison. Overcriminalization. The government bureaucracy turns out laws, statutes, and codes and regulations that reinforce its powers and value systems and those of the police state and its corporate allies, rendering the rest of us petty criminals. The average American now unknowingly commits 3 felonies a day thanks to this overabundance of vague laws that render otherwise innocent activity illegal. Consequently, small farmers who dare to make unpasteurized goat cheese and share it with members of their community have their farms raided. And America's prison population, the largest in the world, continues to grow. And finally, there's the endless wars. America's expanding military empire is bleeding the country dry at a rate of more than $15 billion a month or $20 million an hour. The Pentagon spends more on war than all 50 states combined spend on health, education, welfare, and safety. Yet what most Americans fail to recognize is that these ongoing wars have little to do with keeping the country safe and everything to do with enriching the military-industrial complex at taxpayer expense. Are you getting the message yet?
The next 2 audio clips that I have for you is going to show this very notion to be true. So much for a free and open society. Don't you find that disgusting? That our tax dollars are going to war? More so than health and education combined. And yet all I see is a glorification. I saw that on Facebook on the 4th of July. I saw that in TV commercials, and quite frankly, I was disgusted. I was disgusted. We call ourselves Christians, but we love war. Now I understand that we are under attack from these globalists, and they're using Islam to do it. And I understand that we don't just sit here and take it. That is true. But to glorify imperialism and regime change is a huge contradiction to what we say we believe. And a soul searching of sorts needs to be done, individually and as a society. Are we honestly going down a path that we should be going? And quite frankly, some parts of Donald Trump's foreign policy really has me troubled. This Syrian narrative that's being played, and I'm going to conclude the show with that. The selling of weapons to Saudi Arabia and Qatar, who Trump called out. He called out Qatar as sponsoring terrorism. Saudi Arabia, who we've been told financed 9/11, how that's not an act of war. And I know for those of you that listen to my show often, you've heard this before, but how is it not? How is that not a declaration of war? Over 3,000 Americans were killed. And Saudi Arabia is getting the financial blame. So they paid for the terrorists to come to America. They trained them they paid rather for their flight training, their infiltration, the passports, the visas, the training in Pakistan, harboring Osama bin Laden, if we want to believe that he lived all the way to, what was it, 2012, 2013? He was supposedly taken out. If we want to believe that story, we can. But we're told that Saudi Arabia financed the whole shebang. And yet, we continue to do business with them and finance them and sell them weapons. And now there are allies against terrorism. How could anyone possibly believe that to be true? They are one of the strictest Sharia law Islamic states in this world. How would they not want a world Muslim caliphate? It's in their so-called holy book. They've got the tightest Sharia laws. They're one of the most fundamental Islamic states in the world. And they're not fighting for the world caliphate to make us all submit under Allah? Well, wouldn't they be defaming their faith? Wouldn't they be an infidel then? So the lawmakers in Saudi Arabia are in effect infidels to themselves? How does that make sense, right? Because it's a facade. Oh, they played a part in 9/11? No way. No way. Could they have orchestrated it and got our NORAD just so happened to stand down that day and do drills just on that day? And they knew that, of course, right? Of course, the Twin Towers come down like pancakes. Never happened before, ever. Since we've had airplanes and buildings, never happened before, never happened since. One of the planes hits the newly fortified section of the Pentagon, minimizing damage to military personnel and the only plane out of the four not to make its destination was supposedly headed to the White House and to the Capitol building, which would have taken out key members of government, right? Of course, they were spared. The government was spared, and the military-industrial complex was damaged minimally. It was the citizenry that took the brunt. Must have been a coincidence. And then 7 years later, the country votes in a guy named Barack Hussein Obama, who attended Muslim madrasa schools and raised by radical communists and Satanists, by the way, because they all worship Saul Alinsky, who wrote his book, Rules for Radicals, and dedicated it to Lucifer. So, if you don't want to believe that that archetype exists, they do, and that's what's important here. That's why they have no guilt and they have no shame, and they target our children because they're vulnerable and we are compliant. We continue.
Our so-called representatives in Washington are little more than figureheads, puppets, to entertain and distract the populace from what's really going on. Indeed, the deep state not only holds the nation's capital in thrall, but it also controls Silicon Valley and Wall Street, which supplies the cash that keeps the political machine greased and operating as a diversionary marionette theater. This is fascism in its most covert form, hiding behind agencies and private companies to carry out its dirty deeds. It's a marriage between government bureaucrats and corporate fat cats. As former congressional staffer Mike Lofgren concludes, and I'm quoting here, the deep state is so heavily entrenched, so well protected by surveillance, firepower, money, and its ability to co-opt resistance that it's almost impervious to change. If there's anything the deep state requires, it's a silent, uninterrupted cash flow and the confidence that things will go on as they have in the past. It is even willing to tolerate a degree of gridlock. Partisan mud wrestling over cultural issues may be a useful distraction from its agenda. In other words, as I point out in my book, Battlefield America, The War on the American People, as long as government officials, elected and unelected alike, are allowed to operate beyond the reach of the Constitution, the courts, and the citizenry, the threat to our freedoms remains undiminished. We, the people, can change all this, however. The question, of course, is, are you willing to fight for your freedoms, or are you content to remain a slave in the American police state?
For just a small...
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? I like that last part in the last minute. An uninterrupted cash flow. Do you know who supplies that uninterrupted cash flow? We do. Now, the first clip talked about, the war on terror, which it's really not a war on terror at all. It's just a war to promote fear and to make money. The clip talked about, as I mentioned, the federal government spends more money on war than the 50 states do on education and health. So my next clip talks about, it's titled, "The FBI Admit to Creating Phony Cases in Order to Increase Their Budget." Because let's be honest here, folks. If there ever comes a time where this war on terror is declared victorious and over, well, I guess there's no more need to have all of these engagements, all of these soldiers doing tours, and they're not going to need all of this money. They're not going to need so many FBI and CIA investigators, right? Because, well, it's over and we won. Well, then, if you don't need that many, then you can start cutting the military budget. Uh-oh. I think that's something that John Fitzgerald Kennedy tried, didn't he? He also wanted, I believe, to end the FBI and to merge the CIA into one. Ooh, that didn't work out too well. He didn't want to go into Vietnam and activate all those government contracts sitting on the table. Uh-oh. What happened there, folks? Then the people who didn't believe the government narrative of 1963 and who don't believe it of 2017, we're fake and we're conspiracy theorists. And we wear tinfoil hats. No, we are conspiracy analysts because the definition of a conspiracy is very simple. Two or more people creating a crime. Designing a crime. That's all that means. Two or more people. So if I engage with someone that I know and I say, hey, let's make plans to bump off this liquor store, that's a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy. But people fall right into the government's trap because they've been put to sleep. You're a conspiracy theorist. Nope. Conspiracy analyst. And then I bring it to you, and you decide what you want to do with it. So let's play this clip. It's 5.5 minutes. The FBI admit to creating phony cases in order to increase their budget.
Hi, this is Dave Hodges of the Common Sense Show, and we're the show that's freeing America, one enslaved mind at a time. I find it really interesting that the FBI is now being accused of inventing terrorist plots and framing people in these plots so they can simply enhance their operating budgets. Let me give you a quote here from former FBI Assistant Director Thomas Fuentes. He said, and I quote, "If you're submitting budget proposals for law enforcement agency, for an intelligence agency, you are not going to submit the proposal, quote, we have won the war on terror and everything is great, unquote, because the first thing that's going to happen is your budget's going to be cut in half," said Fuentes. You know, it's the opposite of Jesse Jackson's Keep Hope Alive. It's keep fear alive, keep it alive, unquote. Is this unbelievable that the FBI is engaged in these plots? You're saying, well, that's what's said. How do we know that's being done? Well, there is such proof. Let's take the case of Sammy Hamzeh, age 25, who found himself in the midst of an FBI sting. But what he didn't know is that his government was grooming him to become a terrorist so they could fight terrorism. Now, this man was born in Jordan. He moved to Milwaukee when he was 19. And for 4 years, he lived a completely crime-free life until he was contacted by people that wanted to radicalize him into terrorism and to provide him with weapons. Over and over and over, with hundreds of hours of tapes that have been played publicly now, Hamzeh refused to engage in a violent act. He did accept possession of some of the weapons to placate the constant badgering and pressure he was getting from who he thought were radicalized Muslims, but in actuality, they were FBI agents. Well, first of all, where I come from, this is called entrapment, where the government creates the crime, puts the person in the situation, and gives them almost no choice but to commit a crime. This is clearly entrapment, but trying to get a Muslim free on entrapment charges today, you may as well try to build a bridge to Mars and walk to it, because it's not going to happen in this politically charged atmosphere. Yes, that's right. I do think the courts are prejudiced criminally against potential terrorists, and they're being denied their Bill of Rights, their first 10 amendments to the Constitution, on a consistent basis. No, I don't agree with people who are saying, let's commit jihad against the President of the United States, which is what recently happened with a Muslim leader. But what I am saying is that this man's ability to prove the fact he was entrapped, well, the chances are slim and none. Now, the FBI can't even bring charges against him for terrorism because he wouldn't do anything. So what they're now charging him with is possession of a machine gun, 10 years. Possession of a silencer, 10 years. They're trying to put him away for 20 years for a crime that they absolutely framed him in. If we didn't need to clean out the FBI, if we didn't need to clean out the State Department, this is the poster child case why we should. There is absolutely no excuse to be allowing our government to abuse people in such a manner. This man would never have done anything. He refused to do anything. The guns were put in his possession, and yet what's going to happen? This man's going to serve 20 years so the FBI can keep asking Congress for more money. Well, that's it for the Common Sense Show. Thanks so much for joining us. We're brought to you by Numana Foods. And when that explosion, that reaction happens, whether it's a racially motivated civil war.
So I'm not going to go into this, let it run on with the survival food stuff. But, as you can see, this is a big money maker. And naturally, if you look at it as a business, right, who would want their budget slashed? Naturally, you would want that budget increased, would you not? And so you would take steps to increase that budget. So it just makes sense that you would fabricate such things and you would create a prison society because it's all about the money. Now, this last clip, it's all about the oil. This is titled, What the Media Won't Tell You About Syria. And this person is a young lady named Really Grace. And she's got some good stuff. It looks like she's got some stuff on Venezuela. I'm going to check that out. Maybe I'll play that tomorrow or sometime this week. But she's got some good stuff. Now, I've known a lot of this, but she puts the pieces together really, really well. Now, I understand that you pro-Israel folks. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not anti-Israel, but I'm not this pro-Israel where, like, I'm a fanatic about it. Do I think they should have their own independent state? Well, yeah. I mean, the British annexed the territory. It's a sovereign nation. Absolutely. There never was a Palestine. That's a fraudulent notion that it was a nation. It was a Roman province. But I'm not for, obviously, all of the things that the Israeli establishment does because they're part of the whole wheel. So there are some Israeli implications in this audio. That doesn't make me an anti-Semite. Just to be clear. However, this attack on Syria is not beholden to the 21st century. This has been going on for a long time. So the FBI clip was all about the money. This clip is all about the oil.
Hey Internet friends, yesterday on the 100th anniversary of the U.S. entering World War I, the U.S. launched missiles at a Syrian airbase in response to a chemical weapons attack that reportedly killed more than 100 people. But the question buzzing across the Internet is, what did Assad have to gain from gassing his own people? Thus, we have whispers of a false flag, orchestrated by the very groups, nations, and individuals who would benefit from the fall of Assad. Maybe over the last couple of days, the idea of a false flag has crossed your mind too. Maybe that's why you're watching now. And I would propose that it should give you pause that even for a moment, you consider that these attacks were manufactured. But you're not alone. A lot of us sense something isn't right. The last few days have been marked by rushed judgments, the mainstream media funneling their selective outrage, putting up graphic images of dead children and adults in Syria. Mix that together with tensions with Russia building along with the hostility between Israel and Assad, giving us many factors that might point to a planned invasion. But the mainstream media will never tell us that. They'll never tell us the truth, and we should stop waiting for them to. In the town of Newark, New Jersey lies a company called Genie Energy. The board of directors at this company include big names like former Vice President Dick Cheney, media mogul Rupert Murdoch, member of the Rothschild banking family and investment banker Jacob Rothschild, and ex-CIA director James Woolsey, among others. On the other side of the world, there's a coveted plateau in western Syria, rich in natural resources and history. At the tail end of the Six-Day War of 1967, Israel seized the Golan Heights from Syria, leaving Syrians to flee while almost immediately Israel began to settle there. In violation of the UN Charter, Israel's occupation of the Golan Heights is seen as unlawful. Before his death, Israeli General Moshe Dayan admitted that it was deliberate Israeli provocations into Syrian Golan Heights that gave Israel the manufactured pretext to invade and occupy. Thus, it's been nothing but a dumpster fire since, with Syria trying to retake Golan in 1973, and with both Syria and Israel signing an armistice in 1974. But Israel unilaterally annexed the Golan Heights in 1981, but this move was not recognized internationally. And for Israel to seek to exploit mineral reserves in the occupied Golan Heights was plainly illegal in international law. You know what else is in Golan Heights besides Syrian and Israeli settlements and a whole lot of contempt for each other? Oil. Lots of oil. And natural gas. That's why Genie Energy is there anyway. Does this bother you? Maybe it should. While Murdoch, Rothschild, and Cheney are pumping black gold out of the ground, Turkey, the US, Russia, and a bunch of others have been fighting over Syria's geostrategic location. So who benefits from Syria in disarray? War in Syria means Israel can expand its occupation and settlements, and it also means that a European pipeline can be built. While the media claims to be fair and balanced, how can you stay fair and balanced when you have Dick Cheney, our oil guy, Rupert Murdoch, our propagandist, and Jacob Rothschild, the banker, controlling the media, politics, and the economy? How can you expect the media to deliver the truth of what's going down in Syria, or in the Middle East in general, when they're too busy brainwashing your children to go to war and igniting fear in the hearts of citizens with what is, in my opinion, manufactured terrorism? Do you think U.S. intervention in the Middle East, particularly with Syria, has very little to do with fighting terrorism, and maybe far more to do with the region's rich petroleum reserves? I think the board of directors at Genie Energy could answer that question for us. And of course, the media won't tell you that the consequence of imperialism and insistent international meddling for corporate oil interests destabilizes the entire Middle East, and it led to the formation of radical groups, which are then funded by those who want Syrians, in particular, to either die or seek refuge in another country. Get out so we can have your oil. And we all know Iran is next, especially since British Petroleum, formerly known as the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, will never forget the wealth they sucked from the oil fields of Iran, as they were, in fact, the first company to extract petroleum from Iran. Iran's oil was a global prize and one that BP had no plans to let go. When Winston Churchill helped seize it in the 1920s, he called it a prize from fairyland beyond our wildest dreams. So the rival narrative to, oh my gosh, these pictures of dead children from this chemical attack are horrible, we have to act. The rival narrative is that this is all to overthrow the Syrian government. So the powers that be can install their own government. Then they can install their own central bank. And of course, the reconstruction process from war is really profitable. And you could equip a Syrian army, which is a big market for the arms manufacturers. And then they could also get that coveted pipeline from Qatar to Turkey and all the oil they want in Syria. And of course, all of this also benefits Israel. Taking over Syria gives them more of a safe zone around Israel. But there's one problem. There's one thing standing in the way, and that's Russia. On March 22nd, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson convened a U.S. ministerial conference of something the Trump administration calls the Global Coalition Working to Defeat ISIS. The State Department said that a combined 68 nations and organizations were present. Washington explicitly stated that the three most important states with deep interests in defeating ISIS in Syria and three parties essential to any serious move to dislodge ISIS in Syria, Russia, Iran, and Syria, were not welcome. When asked, Secretary of State Tillerson quipped, "They are not part of the global coalition." And if you remember correctly, Tillerson joined ExxonMobil in 1975 and rose to serve as the chairman and chief executive officer of the company from 2006 to 2016. ExxonMobil is the world's largest publicly traded international oil and gas company. Noodle on that for a minute while I say this. The culture of endless war, the establishment of the terrorist state, the never-ending fear that motivates people to emotionally and financially back the war machine. This is what they want. This is their plan, and they want us to die for it. Don't you think that those who desire war should be the ones fighting on the front lines?
Ironic, isn't it, that Russia seems to be the biggest superpower standing in the way of what looks to be certainly, if not the final obstacle into total global control of the Middle East. It's either Syria is the last one or Iran. Russia stands in the way of these globalists, and whereas America seems to be the biggest advocate of them. You just got to follow the money, folks, and you just have to follow who's being put in place. This guy Tillerson has endless profits to make by a Syrian regime change and a model government that will go along to get along. And Gaddafi refused a central bank, and if I'm not mistaken, I don't think Saddam Hussein plugged into the central bank. But yet, Syria is on the brink of regime change, isn't it? Because that chemical attack, there's no motive for Assad. He had no motive to alienate himself to the new president of the United States who pledged to obliterate ISIS, which only ends the civil war. It only ends the rebellion. But no. And then Nikki Haley comes out and says, any future chemical attack is automatically going to be blamed against the Assad government. Automatically. No investigation, nothing. Chemical attack, boom, Assad did it. Just itching. And Syria, according to my knowledge, is the only Middle Eastern port that Russia has access to. If Russia were to lose that due to regime change, they're in a huge economic mess. So, roll that around your brain for a while. My name is Michael B. This is The Truth Zone. 26 people killed, 21 injured on July 10th yesterday in 4 or 5 different countries. There's your religion of peace, sports fans. See you tomorrow.